In McCurdy, there lived a young girl named Iphioma whose life was nothing like the bright dreams she carried in her heart. Every night, while the rest of the neighborhood slept, she sat under the faint glow of a candle, books spread across the small wooden table. The power was often out, but that never stopped her. Her eyes would sting from the smoke, her fingers tired from the long day. Yet she kept reading, whispering her lessons to herself as though she were reminding her soul that one day, all of this would be worth it. By day, she worked small jobs to support herself, washing clothes for neighbors, helping in the market, running errands for little pay. Her classmates wore neat uniforms and carried expensive bags, while Iphioma often patched her dress and borrowed old books. But despite her struggles, her heart burned with one hope: to graduate and finally make her parents proud. Yet at home her efforts went unnoticed. Her parents' eyes were fixed on her brother. Every small achievement of his was celebrated with laughter and praise, while Iphioma's hard-earned successes were brushed aside as though they meant nothing. When she tried to show them her grades, they barely glanced before turning away. The pain sat quietly in her chest, but she swallowed it and kept working harder. Deep inside, she dreamed of one day stepping on a graduation stage, hearing her parents clap for her, and finally proving that even the forgotten daughter had a light that could not be ignored. The morning of graduation came like a dream for Iphioma. She woke up before the sun, her heart racing with excitement. For years she had studied under candlelight, worked odd jobs, cried in silence, and prayed for this very day. As she stood in front of the small cracked mirror in her room, she carefully dressed in her neatly pressed gown, adjusting it again and again. She had borrowed a pair of black shoes from a neighbor, slightly bigger than her size, but to her they looked like gold. She tied her hair back with a simple ribbon and whispered to her reflection, "Today they will see me. Today Mama and Papa will clap for me." Her heart was full of hope. She imagined her parents smiling proudly, maybe even bringing flowers like she saw in movies. She pictured them calling relatives, telling everyone, "Our daughter made us proud." Holding on to that picture, she walked out of her small house, her steps light as if the ground could not hold her joy. When she arrived at the hall, it was already buzzing with excitement. Families filled the rows of chairs, dressed in bright colors, carrying bouquets, cameras, and gifts. Mothers were fixing their children's gowns, fathers were shaking hands proudly, siblings were cheering loudly. The air was filled with laughter, claps, and the sound of drums from outside. Iphioma's eyes searched eagerly through the crowd. She spotted the 2 chairs where her parents were supposed to sit. She smiled to herself, thinking they might just be running late. She sat down, her heart beating fast, glancing at the door every few minutes. Each time someone walked in, she lifted her head, hoping it was them. But it wasn't. The ceremony began, and the cheering grew louder as names were called. Graduates ran into the arms of their families, wrapped in hugs, kissed on the forehead, showered with gifts. The hall was alive with celebration, but beside Iphioma, 2 chairs remained painfully empty. She tried to smile, pretending it didn't matter, but inside her chest, the first sting of heartbreak cut deep. She clapped for her classmates, forcing her face to stay bright, whispering to herself, "Maybe they are on their way." But as minutes passed, she knew the truth. Her parents weren't coming. Her hands shook, and her throat tightened as she fought back tears. She sat straighter, her eyes fixed on the stage, but she couldn't stop glancing at those empty chairs. The emptiness seemed louder than the music, louder than the cheering, louder than everything else in the hall. That was the moment her joy cracked, the moment she realized that even on the biggest day of her life, the people she longed for most had chosen not to show up. "Still," she whispered inside her heart, "I will not break. Even if they don't clap for me, I will clap for myself." The ceremony went on, filled with music, laughter, and joy. One by one, names were called, and each graduate walked proudly across the stage. The moment their feet touched the ground again, they were met with cheers, hugs, and gifts from their families. Mothers rushed forward with flowers, fathers lifted their children high in the air, and siblings danced and clapped. Cameras flashed everywhere, capturing tears of happiness. It was like a festival of love, every corner of the hall alive with celebration. Iphioma sat quietly in the middle of it all, her hands pressed tightly on her lap. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Each time she saw a mother wrapping her arms around her child, she felt a sharp ache in her chest. When fathers shouted proudly, "That's my son! That's my daughter!" she swallowed hard, pretending not to hear. She kept glancing at the 2 empty chairs beside her, hoping they would suddenly fill. But they remained cold and silent, mocking her with their emptiness. She whispered little excuses to herself, fighting the truth. Maybe they are stuck in traffic. Maybe Mama is not feeling well. Maybe Papa will walk in at the last minute. She repeated these words again and again, but her heart knew better. Her parents had chosen not to come. Her biggest day, her shining moment, was not enough for them. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She didn't want anyone to see her pain. She laughed at classmates' jokes, clapped for others, even forced herself to take a few pictures with friends. But inside, her heart was breaking into pieces. Every cheer for another graduate sounded like a reminder of what she didn't have. Her classmates ran into the arms of their families, flowers pressed into their hands, gifts passed around, pictures taken with proud smiles. Ifeoma stood to the side, her smile faint, her hands empty. She wanted so badly to feel someone's arms around her, to hear someone say, "We are proud of you." But there was nothing. When no one was watching, she let a single tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, forcing herself to stay strong. She didn't want pity. She didn't want anyone to know how deeply it hurt. She held her head high, even as her heart whispered the cruel truth. Her parents had abandoned her moment. Still, in the middle of her silent tears, a quiet fire burned inside her. She told herself, "I will not let this break me. One day they will regret not being here. One day the world will see me, even if my own parents choose not to." The program went on smoothly, with each graduate receiving their certificate, walking down to cheers and applause. The hall was filled with happiness, but as the final moments approached, everyone leaned forward, waiting for the biggest announcement of the day, the name of the top graduating student. It was the moment families had been waiting for, the moment that carried pride, honor, and bragging rights. Mothers clutched their phones, ready to record. Fathers whispered guesses to each other. Students held their breath, secretly hoping their name would be called. The principal stepped up to the podium, his tall frame commanding the stage. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as the microphone caught the quiet weight in his voice. Usually, this was the easiest part of the ceremony. He would announce the best student, the hall would explode with cheers, and the day would end in celebration. But today something stopped him. From the corner of his eye, he saw Ifeoma. She was sitting alone, her gown neatly pressed, her hands clasped together in her lap. 2 chairs beside her sat empty, untouched, almost like shadows. While other graduates were wrapped in flowers and hugs, she sat quietly, forcing a small smile on her face as though she were fine. But the principal noticed what others didn't, the way her eyes glistened, the way her shoulders trembled slightly, the way she kept glancing at the door as if hoping someone would still walk in. He paused, his words stuck in his throat. The silence stretched across the hall. People shifted in their seats, whispering to each other, wondering why he was delaying. A few thought maybe the microphone wasn't working. Others thought he had forgotten his speech. But the truth was, he was fighting his emotions. His heart was heavy, because in that hall full of laughter, one child's loneliness was louder than all the noise. Ifeoma lowered her eyes, not wanting to be noticed. She tried to make herself smaller, invisible, but in that moment, she was the only one the principal could see. His chest tightened as he remembered the nights he had passed by classrooms late and seen her still bent over her books, candlelight flickering against her face. He remembered her essays, her discipline, her quiet determination. She had earned this moment more than anyone else, yet she sat alone with no one to clap for her. The crowd grew restless. The delay was unusual. The hall, once buzzing with excitement, now sank into an uneasy quiet. Mothers stopped recording. Children hushed. Even the graduates turned toward the stage, sensing that something was different. The air felt heavy, almost sacred, as though everyone was waiting for something they could not yet name. Finally, the principal looked up, his eyes scanning the room, his voice thick with emotion. But before he spoke, he took a deep breath, allowing the silence to hang for just a few more seconds. And in that silence, the weight of one forgotten daughter's pain filled the entire hall. The principal gripped the edges of the podium, his eyes sweeping over the graduates and their cheering families. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried a weight that made the hall fall completely silent. "Today," he began slowly, "we celebrate not only success in academics but also courage, sacrifice, and resilience." The audience leaned forward, curious. This was different from the usual speeches. He paused again, his gaze drifting to the empty chairs beside Iphioma. She kept her head down, wishing the ground would swallow her. "There is one student," the principal continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "whose story deserves to be heard. A student who studied under candlelight when there was no power, who worked small jobs to pay for her books, who never gave up even when life gave her every reason to quit. A student who walked this journey without the support that so many of us take for granted." A hush swept across the hall. Parents exchanged glances, whispering to each other. Graduates turned in their seats, trying to guess who he was talking about. "This student," the principal said, his eyes fixed on her now, "has shown us that greatness is not measured by who stands beside you, but by the strength you carry within yourself. And so, with great honor, I announce the top graduate of this class, Miss Iphioma." The hall gasped. For a moment, there was pure silence, as if no one could believe what they had just heard. Then whispers rushed through the rows. "Iphioma." The girl sitting alone, faces turned toward her, eyes wide with shock. Iphioma froze in her seat, her heart thundering in her chest. She could hardly breathe. Her hands shook as she tried to stand, her legs weak beneath her gown. Slowly she rose, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She never imagined her name would be called, never thought her pain would be seen so clearly by anyone, let alone the principal. As she walked toward the stage, her steps unsteady, the hall erupted. Some clapped, some cheered, some simply watched in awe. Her gown swayed around her ankles, her borrowed shoes tapping softly against the floor. Each step felt like a battle between fear and pride. On stage, the principal stretched out his arms and pulled her into a firm embrace. "You are proof," he whispered into her ear, "that your worth is not in who claps for you, but in how brightly you shine even in the dark." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. The certificate was placed in her shaking hands, but the real prize was the moment itself, the hall full of people witnessing her story, her pain and her triumph. She had walked onto that stage trembling, but she stood there taller than she had ever been. And though her parents' chairs remained empty, the entire hall had just seen the forgotten daughter become unforgettable. For a moment after her name was called, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Iphioma stood on the stage, trembling, the certificate clutched tightly in her hands, her cheeks wet with tears. The hall was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on her fragile frame. And then, like a wave crashing against the shore, the sound began. One person stood and clapped, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. The applause grew louder and louder until it felt like thunder shaking the walls. Strangers cheered for her as though she were their own daughter. The sound filled every corner of the room, drowning out the emptiness of the two chairs that had once mocked her. Iphioma's breath caught in her chest. She could hardly believe what she was seeing, hundreds of people standing just for her. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, trying to hold back sobs, but the tears came freely. They weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of healing. Teachers who had watched her journey wiped their eyes openly. Some whispered to each other, "She deserves this. Every bit of it." A few covered their mouths with their hands, unable to hold back their emotions. They remembered her walking barefoot to school some mornings, or coming to class hungry, yet still being the first to raise her hand with the right answer. To them, this was more than a graduation. It was justice for every silent struggle she had endured. The clapping didn't stop. It grew stronger, echoing like a heartbeat across the hall. Students who had once overlooked her joined in, some even chanting her. Ifeoma, Ifeoma. The sound wrapped around her like an embrace, louder than any family cheer could have ever been. The principal stepped closer, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone, he hugged her tightly in front of the entire hall. His voice, low but steady, carried words that sank deep into her soul. Your worth is not who claps, my child, but how brightly you shine. And you shine brighter than all the lights in this room. Her knees nearly gave way, but the strength in his words held her up. She nodded through her tears, clutching the certificate against her chest as though it were a shield of honor. The applause seemed endless, stretching on, as if no one wanted the moment to end. For the first time in her life, Ifeoma didn't feel forgotten. She didn't feel invisible. She stood on that stage not as the daughter whose parents ignored her, but as the girl the whole hall had claimed as their own. And in that sea of clapping hands and tear-filled eyes, she finally understood something powerful. Sometimes the family you hope for doesn't show up, but the world will still rise to its feet when your light cannot be hidden. Cameras flashed non-stop as Ifeoma stood on the stage, wiping her tears, holding her certificate to her chest. The crowd's cheers echoed like music, and in that moment, every photographer in the hall wanted to capture her face. The face of a girl who had walked through fire and still shone brighter than the rest. Her trembling smile, her tear-streaked cheeks, and the principal's comforting arm around her shoulders became an image too powerful to ignore. Within hours, those pictures spread beyond the graduation hall. Students posted short clips on social media, adding captions like, "This is what true strength looks like," and "She stood alone, yet the whole hall stood for her." The videos showed the exact moment the principal called her name, the shock in her eyes, the silence of the crowd, and then the explosion of applause that followed. People who had never met her felt as though they were in that hall, clapping for her too. By evening, her story was everywhere. Twitter trended with her name, Facebook timelines filled with her photos. WhatsApp groups shared her video again and again, each person adding their own words of admiration. Some wrote, "Parents ignored her, but destiny didn't." Others wrote, "The forgotten daughter became Nigeria's daughter today." News blogs picked up the story, calling her the girl who turned pain into power. Radio hosts talked about her on their shows, describing how she stood alone but captured the love of an entire nation. People who had never cared about graduation ceremonies before suddenly found themselves crying over the pictures of a young woman they had never met. Ifeoma, sitting quietly in her small room that night, didn't even realize how big the moment had become. Her borrowed phone buzzed endlessly with notifications she could barely keep up with. Old classmates messaged her. Strangers sent her blessings. Some offered opportunities, some just wrote, "You gave us hope today." But the most powerful thing was the way her story started a conversation. Parents online debated what it meant to truly support their children. Youths across Nigeria used her story as inspiration, saying, "If Ifeoma can rise without support, then we can too." Even people outside the country reshared the post, touched by her courage. Her single moment of loneliness had turned into a national moment of love. The whole of Nigeria seemed to be standing for her, just as that hall had. And though her parents had chosen silence, the world's voice was louder, lifting her higher than she had ever dreamed. The caption that went viral summed it all up perfectly. She stood alone, yet the whole hall stood for her. And in that line, the forgotten daughter became unforgettable, her story etched into the hearts of millions. That evening, while the whole country buzzed with excitement over Ifeoma's story, her parents sat in their living room in Makurdi, staring at a phone screen in silence. The pictures of their daughter on stage were everywhere. Her tear-streaked face, the principal's embrace, the standing ovation. Video clips kept playing on loop, each one showing the same truth. The child they had ignored had just been lifted higher than anyone else. At first, her mother tried to wave it off, muttering, "It's just social media. These things fade." But deep down her voice shook. She could hear neighbors outside, talking loudly enough for their words to be carried through the open window. "Did you see? That's Ifeoma, their daughter. And they didn't even go." Another voice added, "How can parents abandon a child on graduation day? Shameful." Laughter followed, but it wasn't the good kind. It was the kind that burned. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his pride bruised. For years, he had believed their son was the one who would bring honor to the family, while Ifeoma's achievements meant little. Now, the whole town was praising the daughter he had dismissed. The gossip stung like fire, and he could not escape it. Every ping of a new notification, every whisper outside the door, reminded him of the mistake he could no longer hide. Their son, sitting in the corner scrolling through his own phone, smirked. "Look at you two," he sneered. "The whole world is clapping for her, and you're sitting here like fools. You left her chair empty, and now the internet is dragging you." His laugh was sharp and cruel. "You always said I was the star. Well, guess what? Your star just got dimmed. She outshined me, outshined us all." His words cut deep, but neither parent could respond. They sat in silence, humiliated, their faces heavy with shame. The mother pressed her hands against her ears, trying to block out the gossip drifting in from the street. But the more she tried, the louder it seemed to grow. Children running past their gate shouted, "Anti-graduate! Anti-graduate!" They weren't calling her son's name. They weren't calling for the parents. They were calling for Ifeoma. That night, her father paced the room, restless. He could not sleep. The image of her standing proudly on that stage haunted him. For the first time he realized what he had thrown away. This was the honor he had always craved, and it had slipped through his hands because he had chosen to ignore the very child who gave it to him. Her mother wept quietly into her wrapper, not just from shame but from regret. But it was too late. The whole world had already seen the truth. Their daughter had risen without them, and now their absence was not just a family secret, it was a public disgrace. In the weeks that followed her graduation, Ifeoma's life changed in ways she had never imagined. The story of the forgotten daughter who stood alone yet received a standing ovation had touched millions. Her phone never stopped buzzing. Universities reached out, offering her scholarships. Companies sent job offers, impressed not just by her grades but by her courage. Invitations poured in from schools, churches, and organizations asking her to come and share her story. At first it felt overwhelming. She was just a girl from McCurdy who had studied under candlelight, never expecting the world to notice her. But now the world wanted to hear her voice. And slowly, she began to realize that her pain had given her a platform, and her silence had turned into a voice that could not be ignored. When she stood in front of her first audience, her hands trembled, but as she spoke, sharing how it felt to sit alone, how it hurt to be unseen, and how she refused to give up, something powerful happened. People cried. Others nodded with understanding. Many came to her afterwards saying, "Your story is my story too." In that moment, Ifeoma knew this was her purpose. Instead of chasing the highest-paying job, she made a choice that surprised many. She decided to stay in McCurdy and work with children who were neglected, abandoned, or overlooked just as she once was. She started small, tutoring young girls after school, helping them with their homework, encouraging them to dream bigger. But soon her work grew. With the support of donations and scholarships, she founded a small center where children could read, study, and feel valued. Her center became a safe haven. Children who once hid in the shadows now ran through the gates calling her anti-graduate. She bought candles and lamps so that no child would have to strain their eyes like she once did. She told each of them, "You are not forgotten. You are worthy. You can shine too." Word spread quickly. Journalists visited her center, writing stories about the girl who had turned heartbreak into hope. International organizations reached out, offering support for her programs. She became a speaker at conferences, her voice shaking but strong, reminding the world that every child deserves love, support, and a chance to be seen. Through it all, Ifeoma carried her pain not as a burden but as a torch. She understood loneliness in a way few could, and that understanding made her unstoppable. She didn't just build a future for herself, she built a future for countless others who once felt invisible. And so, the girl who had once cried in silence now stood tall as a voice for the voiceless. Ifeoma's new beginning was not just about success. It was about rewriting the story of every child who had ever been forgotten, and proving that even the most neglected soul can rise to light the way for others. The sun was bright over the busy marketplace in Makurdi. Women called out prices of vegetables. Men pushed wheelbarrows. Children chased each other between stalls. In the middle of all that noise, a calm silence seemed to follow Iphioma as she walked through the crowd. Her head was high, her steps steady, her presence commanding attention without her saying a single word. Children spotted her first. "Auntie, graduate!" they shouted, running toward her with wide smiles. Some grabbed her hands, others clung to her gown, their laughter filling the air. She bent down, hugging them warmly, her face glowing with joy. The marketplace, once just a noisy place of trade, now felt like a stage where her new life played out daily. The neighbors watched quietly from their stalls, whispering among themselves. Not long ago, many had pitied her or ignored her, thinking she would fade into nothing. Now, their whispers were filled with admiration. "That's her, the girl who made the whole nation proud," another voice added softly. "The one her parents left behind, yet she rose higher than anyone else." And there, standing a little apart, were her parents. They said nothing. They couldn't. Their faces carried the weight of shame, their eyes unable to meet hers. They saw what the world saw now, the daughter they had neglected, the daughter they had underestimated, the daughter whose light could no longer be hidden. Iphioma did not stop or look their way. She simply smiled at the children beside her, her laughter rising above the marketplace noise. She no longer needed their applause. Because the truth was clear now, she was the girl they forgot, yet the whole world remembered.